about the stresses on the Canadian Forces, I sat down when I was Commander of the Army with our Chief of Defence Staff at the time and with the Minister, who was John McCallum, and I wanted to articulate for him that the Army needed an operational pause, and I was saying that we're going to be overstretched, and this is predictable and you can't change it. And what I did was I just simply draw stickmen, and I draw one for each 1,000 soldiers, and I canceled one off because they were sick or left out of battle or they were on paternity leave or maternity leave or something like this, and I canceled 2 more out because they had just come back from operations. I canceled 2 more back because they were on operations, and then I canceled 4 more out because they were going on operations in the next 12 months, and all of a sudden, a year later, we were reduced to 0 stickmen. And John McCallum looked at it and he said, how can I possibly argue with that? And the fact was he couldn't. He said, I don't like it, but I accept it. And you know, so he agreed to the operational pause, which, by the way, from my perspective, was the greatest strategic mistake I ever made. I pooched it badly. Here's what happened. We got the operational pause. My vision was we were going to use that pause to recruit more young men and women and fill up those ghost units that were now so hollow. We were going to accelerate our equipment programs and get the Army refitted and re-equipped, and we were going to juice up our training and make sure that the training reflected the new visions that we were trying all to get towards. And as soon as we got into an operational pause with no Canadian troops deployed around the world, or very few, guess what happened? The urgency disappeared in Ottawa. We went back to 3 to 4 to 5 year equipment acquisition cycles. We got no extra recruits, and the money started disappearing as opposed to coming in. And we ended up leaving the operational pause worse off than when we went into it. It was a great strategic error. I take full responsibility for it. And unfortunately, my drawing that time helped lead me to it. So there you go. You live with some things.
I don't want to cut in too deeply into your time for signing books. I guess I might say selling books as well, which is a part of the project. But there are a couple of questions that I think the Canadians really want to know. And I think in the book, there's a very interesting part where one of your former commanding officers says to you, your job as a commander is to protect your troops from good ideas. In retrospect, given the cost in lives and you know, some $20 billion that was the budget officer, was Afghanistan one of those good ideas that the Canadian troops should have been protected from?
Well, I think you should ask the government of Canada that, and the prime ministers and the governments who committed our troops there. But here's what I believe. I believe that we are a G8 nation. We're the richest country in the world, in my view, the most affluent, the most luxurious, and the best, by the way. And I think we have a responsibility around the world to play an enormous role to help defeat extremism, to help make the lives of people better in a variety of ways. And I think that means that we have to do operations like Afghanistan as part of that responsibility. Let me just tell you, nobody has worn the deaths of a Canadian soldier heavier than I have. And I'm not looking for sympathy. That was my job, my responsibility. I knew most of the soldiers that we had lost. I had met almost all of them, and I'll tell you, there's nothing more emotional than going to see a family who has lost their son, for example, and sitting down with them, and the last picture they have of their boy that he sent home from Afghanistan before he was killed is a picture with me standing with him, and it really brings it home when you're doing that kind of thing. Every one of those deaths touched me. I mourned and grieved with every one of those families. And we have to separate that as a G8 nation from our international responsibilities and say, these are the things that we have to do. And we just want, back to our initial conversation with those parliamentarians, we just want to make sure when we're doing that our parliament is doing everything necessary to make sure we're set up for success to do it, and at the same time reduce the risk to it. I don't believe Afghanistan is a mistake. I'm an eternal optimist. The people of Afghanistan, and I've met hundreds and thousands of them, want anything but what they've had over this past 3, 4, 5 to 30 years. They'd love to have security. They want us there. They don't want us there. What they understand is that they need us there in the shorter term, and they're willing to put up with a lot of things if we can help them square themselves away to a future that's not what they've had in the past. I believe Afghanistan is part of our responsibility as a G8 nation.
And the corollary question to that is, there's a lot of confusion about what we're going to do there post 2011. Can Canadians continue to contribute there without being involved in a combat role?
Well, it depends on what you're going to do. But if you're going to do something in the South, you're going to be involved in fighting and therefore combat. And here's what I would say about 2011. You know, Canadian government's talked about this. Everybody talks about it. Canada will leave if Canada decides in 2011. We should be, and so clearly that is where the government is looking towards right now. Two, we should be under no false impression that the security job will not be finished in 2011. If our soldiers leave, somebody will have to replace them. That would probably be American or British in my view. The Afghan army is not yet ready to take over that security. Their spokesman a couple of weeks ago said their aim was 2013. I actually believe that's a bit optimistic, but it's lovely to see them say, hey, we want to take over our own responsibility for security for our country. But lastly, I'll say this. No matter when Canadian soldiers leave Afghanistan, they can walk out with their heads held high, with the pride that they have done an incredible job because of their work of containing the Taliban in southern Afghanistan. You know, 2/3 of Afghanistan or more, all that northwest, north part, northeast part, Kabul area, they're essentially a normal Afghanistan. People live their normal lives, their own army and police forces do their security, they're actually getting on with things. Nobody ever hears about that back here in Canada. And you know, 6 million children, you hear it all the time, 6 million children got vaccinated because of work our soldiers were doing with CETA, with the Afghan government. And just as an aside, given what we've gone through on vaccination programs here in recent days and weeks in Canada, out of those 6 million children, not one of them was a hockey player. Pretty incredible, eh, to be able to see. So I would say they can leave with pride, and you know, but I'll sum up by saying, look, actually in this country, I think we need to have a strategic discussion on what Canada, this G8 nation in my view in the world, what Canada should do in the world, what our role is around the world, and then within that, what should we be doing inside of Afghanistan. I'll tell you this also, it is impossible to have a discussion like that when you're running from one minority government to another, to another, to another, because guess what? You are always in an election campaign mode, and like it or not, everybody in Ottawa is focused on next Tuesday, or 2 weeks from now, or January, probably not January because the Olympics are right around the corner, right? Maybe June, but at the latest next October. It is short-sighted approach to running, you know, the best nation in the world, and it means it's really tough, actually I believe impossible to have a discussion like that, sadly for our great country.
So is your hat now in the ring?
Never, never. Why would anybody in our great country throw their hat in the ring to run for political office right now? Looking at that junior kindergarten in Ottawa, what occurs there on a daily basis in questions that are embarrassing to us. No. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you also for being here this evening. Thank you.